Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to my first podcast on Fascination Health Psychology. My name is Dr. Karim. I'm a psychotherapist and a neuroscientist. These podcast series have been funded by the Department of Integration and Gender Equality of the city of Reutlingen. The aim of this podcast is to support refugees in Germany from African countries who speak English to learn how to prevent psychological and psychosomatic diseases and how to improve your psychological well-being. Before I start with this first podcast, I recommend that you get some paper and a pen and note down some of this fascinating information you will just receive on health psychology so that you would profit more from this lecture. The human brain is actually the most complex structure in our universe. The human brain consists of 100 billion neurons, and each neuron can make the connections to up to 20,000 other neurons. In this picture, you see such a neuron. In the mid, you see the body, the center of the neuron, and surrounding it, you see the connections these neurons can make. Now, the connection between two neurons are called synapses. Now, what is really interesting is that learning changes your brain. If you learn anything, learning produces more synaptic connections between neurons. Now, look at these synapses above in the picture and the synapses below of the picture. You realize that below there are much more synapses and above are much fewer synapses. What's also interesting is if everything which is specific in you, your hobbies, things which you like, things which you don't like, are represented in your brain as a network of connected neurons. Now, if you do any kind of behavior a lot, then the neural network which is responsible for this behavior is very strongly connected. Now imagine somebody who is depressive and the whole day, every day, he has thoughts like, I'm not good enough, other people are better than me, I failed in my life, I'm not good enough. If you get accustomed to these depressive thoughts, then after a while you will do them automatically. And that means that you have so many synapses for these thoughts that you are doing it automatically. Let me give another example. If you can drive a car, remember when you start learning how to drive a car, how complicated it was and with how much effort you have to pay attention, how you change from the first to the second to the third, how to let the gear slowly and not quickly, and you have to pay a lot of attention on how to drive a car. But once you do that every day, then after a while you will drive a car automatically without paying a lot of attention. Once you do a behavior automatically, that means that you have so many synapses for this behavior that you can do it without effort. The same thing is also true for depressive thoughts. So if you are accustomed every day to think in a bad way on yourself, on the others, this pessimistic way of thoughts, if you do it every day, then you will get accustomed to it and you will do it automatically. And in your brain, then you have so many synapses for this specific way of behavior. And you will be an expert in diminishing yourself. You'll be an expert in destroying your self-esteem. Now, what is really important is that you differentiate between thoughts and facts. Not every thought is a fact, and every psychological disorder has its typical dysfunctional thoughts. So if you are accustomed in thinking in a bad way on yourself, on people who are similar to you, thinking in a bad way on yourself, on Germans, then you have so many synapses that you do that automatically. But once you stop doing the thoughts, then the synapses can again fade away. And the synapses for positive thinking will grow and grow, so that one day you will be accustomed in having optimistic way of thinking and not a non-depressive way of thinking. A lot of people think, for example, if a person is 35 years old and he has been his whole life depressive, some people think that it is a part of their personality and they have to stay depressive the whole life. Well, this is actually not true. It is possible to change your behavior, and changing your behavior will change your brain. But the point is, at the beginning, it is connected with effort. But once you do it every day, after a while, you will do or have this positive way of thinking automatically, because then you will have enough synapses for these thoughts. One of the most interesting discoveries in brain research in the last 30 years is that thoughts can change your brain. And I mean your whole life through. Even in old age, you can change your brain structure. And the second information is that thoughts can make you ill. So it is not trivial on what you are thinking most of the day. If you look at pictures of the brain, you might assume that brains are similar. Well, this is the wrong information. Every brain is really unique. There are no two brains who are identical. Even in one-eyed twins, even in them, the brains are not identical, although their genes are identical. Learning can change your brain, and even so we actually assume that people who have psychological disorders, that actually you learned to be depressed, you learned to have compulsive disorder, you learned to have anxiety. So if we know that you learned how to think and behave in a pathological way, you can relearn and change this depressive and pathological way of thinking behavior into healthy and a healthy way of thinking and behavior. Here you see two real brains which we use in the University of Tübingen in teaching neuroanatomy to students. And by the way, men have in average larger brains than women, but that does not mean that men are more intelligent. The size of the brain is correlated to the size of the body. So taller people have larger brains and smaller people have smaller brains. The large brain which you see here belongs to a truck driver, and the small brain which you see there belongs to a physician, to a female physician. Although the female brain, this female brain is smaller, if you compare the two brains, you will realize that the smaller brain looks much more complex. If we take away the above skin of the brain, then you will see the beautiful complexity of the cortex. Now, as you see, the brain has a structure like that. So the elevated parts of the brain are called gyrus, and the lowering parts are called sulcus. Here in red color, you see the main sulcus in the brain, the so-called sulcus centralis. And the gyrus in front of it belongs to the motor cortex, which is responsible for your movements, and the gyrus behind the sulcus is called the somatosensory cortex, which is responsible for tactile perception. Now, the right motor cortex is representing your other way around. The right motor cortex is representing your left body part, and your left motor cortex is representing your right half of the body. And around in the mid are your feet represented, and then your hand is represented, and then your face is represented. So if somebody has a stroke in the hand representation in the left motor cortex, then the right hand will be paralyzed. If somebody has a stroke in the face area, then the right side of the face will be paralyzed. And the other way around, if you have a stroke in the left representation of your hand, then the left hand would be paralyzed. Now, what is interesting is that training can change the structure of your brain. So, if, for example, you learn an instrument, a music instrument, then the representation of your hand fingers will be larger in the brain. Also, beautiful empirical studies have shown that, for example, blind people who learn Braille reading and use their index finger to read Braille, this training leads to an enlargement of the representation of the index finger in the motor and in the sensory cortex. So learning changes the structure of the brain, which is really amazing that training and learning can change the structure of your brain. Now, here we have a sagittal cut of the brain, and here above you see the human cortex. And evolutionary, the human cortex is the newest part of the brain, and the human cortex is also the most complicated one compared to other species. In front you have the so-called prefrontal cortex, and it is really important in several tasks. First of all, in taking the perspective of others. We call that theory of mind, that you have a theory what is going on the mind of others. So taking the perspective of others, the prefrontal cortex is really crucial for this type of behavior. Also empathy, to feel with others. The prefrontal cortex is also responsible for that. Moral cognition, deception, all that, in all these tasks, the prefrontal cortex is really important. Then you see here the corpus callosum, which is connecting the two hemispheres which is with each other. So if you learn, for example, a music instrument and you use both hands in piano or in guitar, that would lead to an enlargement of the corpus callosum. Then you have here the thalamus, and the thalamus is really important in conscious perception. We call that also the thalamocortical gating. So here it is decided if you perceive something subconsciously or consciously with awareness. And then below the thalamus you have the so-called hypothalamus. And the hypothalamus has several functions. One of them, it is also responsible for hunger, but also for aggression. Now, if you feel anger, the hypothalamus is firing. And what is really interesting is that the prefrontal cortex is responsible in regulating your emotion. So it is interesting that evolutionary, similar parts are responsible for hunger and for aggression. And if you can control a basic desire as hunger, then you should also be able to control your anger and your aggression. Now, patients who easily get aggressive, who has so-called impulsive personality disorder, we know that they have deficits in the prefrontal cortex. Also, people who have an antisocial personality disorder or so-called psychopaths, they have also deficit in the prefrontal cortex. So if you are a person who tends to insult quickly, get quickly angry, that means that your prefrontal cortex is not well developed. But the good news is the brain is like a muscle which you can train. So once you take the decision that you want to control your anger, you want to control your aggression, this would lead to strengthening of the prefrontal cortex. You will not have more neurons, but you will have more synaptic connections from the prefrontal cortex to the hypothalamus, and then you can inhibit these aggressive impulses better and better. At the beginning, it will afford efforts from you, but once you do that every day, then you will do it one day automatically, because then you have enough synapses for this kind of behavior. Emotion regulation is also very important for psychological well-being. So if you are in your family and you easily hit your family members, or you are aggressive or insult them or shout, some people think this is a sign of strength. But actually this is a sign of weakness, because your prefrontal cortex is so ill-developed that it is not able to control the aggressive impulses coming from the hypothalamus. But once you decide you want to regulate your emotion, and then you, for example, you have the desire to shout or to insult, but you overcome this desire, then you are strengthening your prefrontal cortex. And this is possible. Some people believe it belongs to my personality to be angry and insult and shout. Well, this is not correct. If you are able to drive a car, then that means that you change your brain from a brain who is not able to drive a car into a brain who can drive a car. And if you are accustomed of shouting and yelling and insulting, then you can change your brain to a brain who can get accustomed in stopping this behavior, and instead of insulting, using other ways of communication. This is possible. Here I would like to show you a small quiz. Look at these two pictures of the former American President Nixon. And my question is, how many years do you think are between these two pictures? If I show these two pictures even to medical students, most of them assume that there are 10 or 15 years between both pictures. Well, the answer is, between both pictures are not 15 years, are not 10 years, not 5 years, not 1 year, not even 1 year. It is only 6 months. And here you see, in a beautiful example, how chronical stress can change the human body. Maybe you heard of the Watergate affair, where it came out that there was deception in the election campaign, and Nixon was forced to go down as a president and to stop his candidacy. And actually nobody is really harming him directly, but the whole process happens actually only in his brain. And you can see how thoughts of shame and loss of reputation and stress and depressive thoughts can change the human body. And this leads us to the fascinating question: how can chronical stress, or how can psychological stress, lead to psychological and psychosomatic disorders? Psychosomatic disorders are bodily symptoms, however, which have psychological origin. First of all, you should know you have a connection between psychological processes and hormones in your body. We call that psychoneuroendocrinology. Here you see the hypothalamus can trigger specific neurotransmitters, and this neurotransmitter leads that your adrenal gland, which is exactly above your kidney, can produce adrenaline and noradrenaline. So if you are in a stress situation, then the first stress axis is activated, and the adrenal gland produces adrenaline and noradrenaline. And this leads to activation of your heart. Your heart would beat faster, and your blood vessels will get more narrow. You will have so-called vasoconstriction, and your blood pressure will rise. When stress is chronically, then you have a second stress axis which is more dangerous, which will be activated. The hypothalamus produces neurotransmitter which leads to your hypophysis producing ACTH, and this induces in the surroundings of your adrenal gland that it produces cortisol. Cortisol, first of all, suppresses your immune system, and it attacks the neurons in the hippocampus. The hippocampus, you can see it here. The hippocampus is responsible for memory, or more precisely, it is responsible for transforming information from your short-term memory into your long-term memory. And cortisol attacks and destroys the neurons in your hippocampus. This was shown in this pioneering study. You see slices of the hippocampus. And you can see here the effect of stress on your hippocampus. Between the two green arrows, you see the neurons in the hippocampus before stress and after confrontation with stress. And we see that confrontation with stress in monkeys produces high amounts of cortisol, and this cortisol level destroys the neurons in the hippocampus, which can lead then to concentration problems, learning problems, and memory problems. Now, what is really interesting is this stress axis is activated when you are really in danger, or also by your thoughts. So, if, for example, during your escape from your country to Germany, it is quite possible that you was in a situation where people were insulting you, or you had a fight with somebody. Some people might even have post-traumatic stress disorder. So if you are thinking of these situations, then already your thoughts will activate these stress hormones and will have the effects, these bad effects on your body. So these hormones are activated either when you are really in danger, or if you are thinking of problems which happen to you or which might happen to you in future. The other process which happens is in your autonomic nervous system. The autonomic nervous system have two parts, the sympathicus and the parasympathicus. The sympathicus are nerve fibers which are going from the mid of your spinal cord, here in yellow, to several organs. They are going to your heart, to your stomach, to your digestive system, to your muscles. And when you are in danger, then the sympathicus let your heart beat faster. The sympathicus lets your breathing frequency gets higher, your muscles are more tensioned, and you are prepared to fight or to flight. We call that the fight or flight reaction. And everything which you don't need to fight or flight will be stopped. The digestive process will be stopped, sexual processes will be stopped, the regeneration of skin tissues, the regeneration of your hair cells, all regeneration processes will be stopped. The counterpart of the sympathicus is the so-called parasympathicus, here shown in green. So these green nerve fibers are coming out from the neck part of your spinal cord and from the lowest part of the spinal cord in green. It goes to the same organs, and the parasympathicus is activated when you are relaxed. And it makes your heart beat slower, your blood pressure goes down, your blood vessels are, you get so-called vasodilatation, so the blood pressure goes down, your muscles get relaxed, and again the digestive process is activated, the regeneration of skin, the regeneration of hair cells, all these regeneration processes are then again working. So what is again important, that the sympathicus is activated when you are really in danger, or also when you are thinking of problems. And therefore you see that thoughts can change your body, and if this happens chronically, then you can get ill. So therefore it is important to be aware of what are you thinking of most of the day. So I don't say never think of problems, but you should decide when is it reasonable to think of problems and when it is not reasonable. It is not reasonable, for example, when you want to sleep. But a lot of my patients are telling me that while they are in bed, then they are thinking of problems which happened in the past or could happen in future. This activates your sympathicus, and then for sure you cannot sleep. Others tell me that they are thinking of problems while they are eating. So if you want to eat and then you think of problems, then your body is prepared to fight or flight about not eating. So your stomach is actually surprised. Why are you eating now? I think we should now fight or flight. Why are you eating now? So therefore, you should pay attention when is it reasonable to think of problems and when not. Because thinking of problems which happen in the past or could happen in the future changes your neurophysiological processes in your body. This is a classical experiment published by Weiss in 1971, and this is really a fascinating experiment showing for the first time how psychological stress can induce even lesions in the body. Now this this experiment was as the following. There were two mice. There was cage 1 or mouse 1 and mouse A and mouse B. Both of them got electroshocks at the floor of their cage. So both got electroshocks. When mouse A pressed leather, then the electroshock stopped for mouse A and mouse B. When mouse B pressed the leather, then nothing happened. So that means that the physical amount of electroshocks were for both mice the same. The only difference was the psychological one. Mouse A can control the stressor and mouse B cannot control the stressor. This treatment led to the following amazing result. The stomach of mouse A was almost normal, whereas mouse B had massive gastrointestinal lesions, massive stomach ulcers, which can even lead to bleeding in the stomach. So here you can see that two creatures can have the same amount of physical stress. One will get ill and the other will not get ill, depending on the coping strategies. So that means if, for example, you are a refugee and you are sleeping, you are six persons in one room, and you have a lot of physical stresses around you. Some people might get ill, and some people might not get ill, depending on your coping strategies. So therefore, we'd like to show you which coping strategies can help you overcoming this difficult period in your life without getting psychologically and psychosomatically ill. So let's come to the conclusions. It is really amazing, as I said, that thinking can change your brain structure, and thinking can also lead to psychological and psychosomatic disorders. We learned that if you get accustomed to having depressive or negative thoughts about yourself, then you have so many synapses, then you are doing these thoughts automatically. But once you stop making these dysfunctional thoughts and replace them with positive thoughts, then at the beginning it is connected with effort, but once you do that every day, then you will do that automatically, because then you have enough synapses for this positive way of thinking. Another thing is that thinking of problems which happen in the past or happen in the future activates specific stress hormones which can have quite bad effects on your body, and activates the sympathicus, which allows your body to fight or to flight. So I don't say never think of problems, but you should decide when is it reasonable and when is it not reasonable. And during the following podcasts, I would like to show you several ways which coping strategies are effective that you would overcome this difficult time period without developing psychological or psychosomatic disorders. Finally, I would like to thank my colleagues who supported me in developing these webinars. Moreover, I would like to thank the Department of Integration and Gender Equality of the City of Reutlingen for funding this project. Thank you for your attention. Goodbye.